Welcome to the Amash Files, your one-stop podcast for Justin Amash's march to the presidency, featuring deep dives into who Justin Amash is, campaign analysis from experts, and news from the campaign trail. If you're ready, let's get started. Well, hey there. Welcome to a special episode of the Amash Files, where Tyler and I are going to break down what's been going on in the last 2 weeks or so from the campaign since we first had time to chat together. But also, we just finished watching the first presidential debate for Libertarian Party candidates, including Justin Amash. We hosted by the state of Kentucky. So, Tyler, how are you doing?
I'm well. I think it was an exciting debate. I think that I've never seen a debate over Zoom before, but it was nice. I think the LP Kentucky executed it well, and lots of interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I was actually really impressed from the technological standpoint outside of the candidate. So to rehash for people who might not have had a chance to watch it yet, there was Jim Gray, Jacob Hornberger, Justin Amash, Joe Jorgensen, a lot of J's in there, and Vermin Supreme, who were the five candidates. They're all coming in through Zoom from their homes, I assume. Jim Gray had a weird, he was like in a box. He had a bad internet, or
his first answer was illegible. I couldn't hear anything he said for his first response, but he got better.
It was difficult. And you're okay with that because people understand the technology issues. But overall, I agree. I think it was entertaining. It was very interesting. I mean, if you're into this sort of in the weeds sort of libertarian politics, it was definitely there's a lot to sort of absorb. So why don't you just give us your, I guess, just broad, 10,000 foot view of what the debate was like and how you thought sort of it transpired for the 2 hours.
Yeah, long debate. Sure. I think that at the core of it, there were sort of four positions. One was Justin Amash, who I think was articulating a very unique platform of principle, but also how do we advance the party? How do we grow the party? How do we win an election? And then I think Jorgensen and Gray were kind of fighting for a middle ground between that. Vermin Supreme was sort of doing his own thing. He talked a lot about culture, a lot about satire. Interesting, but kind of on a different plane of other people. And Hornberger was pretty much, in my opinion, a single-issue person, and that was doing anything he could to discredit and take down Justin Amash. I didn't really get a good impression of what he thinks, where his background is, what he wants to do as an LP presidential candidate. So that's kind of my view of it. I think there were a lot of different positions kind of being staked out, but a lot of it was between purity and pragmatism and what that looks like, what that means, different perspectives on that.
Yeah, and I would say in that respect, having watched a number of LP presidential debates, it sort of always falls into the camp of some sort of blend, as we've had with our guests, where we have the blend of pragmatism versus, purity. What is your goal as a party? What is your goal as a presidential campaign? Are you looking to win? Are you looking to make an impact? Are you looking for ballot access? How do you balance all those things? And you can imagine if you're a party activist, and it's easy if you're someone who's just entering the party to say, we want to run the purest candidate or whatever. But then you may have someone who's been in the party for 20 years, who's been out in the rain, who's been out, when it's 100 degrees gathering signatures to get ballot access. And for them, if they can get someone who, prevents that pain and they can actually enjoy a presidential season, it means a lot. And so they have certain concerns. And then there are, of course, the people who want to see, is it the possibility of getting on the debate stage with the two major candidates? And is that possible? And if so, how is that a game changer for the party in general? And so I think you have all those sorts of things competing here. And we saw them all on display. I would say the only unusual thing from the Libertarian Party nominating debate was Vermin Supreme. He was very unusual in the sense that he was not really talking about those issues that really I've ever seen in a Libertarian Party debate. I mean, he was talking about sort of notoriety and almost kind of denouncing the system in some respects, which was different. I mean, it was just sort of
it was interesting. Message. I think he stood out in a way that the other candidates didn't. With regards to debates, one thing that really stuck out to me, only two candidates, Justin and Jorgensen, were committed to saying, I want to hit that threshold. I want to be in the debates. Hornberger was pretty clear that he will be his version of libertarian purity. He doesn't care about votes. I think he said that explicitly. He doesn't want votes. He wants to stick true to what he believes in that context as candidate. Jim Gray was sort of going for a small state strategy to get some electoral votes, maybe throw it to the House. And then Vermin, as you said, kind of just doing his own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's probably a good summary. I was surprised that even if you're someone who's running a purity campaign, I would say there are people who run purity campaigns before, they always want to have some sort of level of electoral success or
Mm-hmm.
notoriety or something that, you can advance the message. Because, it's one thing to have a campaign that's run on principles and purity, but if no one ever hears it and you have no strategy for people to hear your message, I mean, kind of like, I don't understand what the point is of, why you're running for
Mm-hmm.
president. I don't understand the motivation for going through what is really kind of a hassle, flying over the country, speaking conventions. I don't know. You're not, I don't think, looking for a book deal because the party's not that big that you're going to have, sell 1 million copies. So I'm sort of puzzled. I was really surprised, and my goal was not to talk about the other candidates really much. I mean, obviously we're focused on Justin Amash, but it was really surprising Hornberger's performance in this debate. And I don't want to focus too much on him, but I expected him and most of the candidates to sort of generally go after Justin and point out the things that, he's vulnerable in. He just entered the party, he's new, he hasn't really done anything for the party at this point, obviously. And then maybe, question some votes and things like it. But it was like it was a strange sort of strategy of like almost an obsession, especially with him. I don't quite know who is providing his advice for this debate.
Well, I think that really not everything he said was based on Justin, but I think so many of his comments, conservatism, progressivism, he insisted on calling Justin not a libertarian, but a conservative libertarian or libertarian conservative. And a lot of his comments with things like the CIA or various bills that, frankly, I don't think are really rooted in reality. I think he's sort of concocting an image. And again, I didn't get an impression of who he was from watching that. If I didn't know anything about Hornberger before this, I learned that he's from Texas. I learned that he used to be a lawyer, and I learned that he really doesn't like Justin Amash. I don't know what vision he's articulating. I don't know why I should vote for him. I don't know what he's trying to say. He defined himself as anti-Justin, basically.
Yeah, and I think that is the danger of any candidate who bases their campaign solely on defeating the other person and not on articulating a reason why to vote for them. I think you see this repeatedly in campaigns that people think that there's this hostility towards a certain candidate. And I would argue, the Democrats are walking into this thing with Donald Trump, the same thing, right? Like you have this assumption that there's all this animosity towards Donald Trump. All we have to do is just have a warm body, someone can fog a mirror, and we win. You can't run a campaign on I felt like, Mitt Romney ran a campaign that I'm not Obama campaign, and he got obliterated. Mm-hmm. And Hornberger presents no vision for, like you said, no idea, right? Again, no motivation for why he's doing this. Or what he's really for. I mean, he seems passionate about libertarianism, but he didn't even really articulate, I think, real well what a libertarian is to him. I mean, specifically, it always came in the middle of a tirade, being upset about the conservatives and the progressives and I don't know. He was kind of all over the place, and then he also repeated an answer that he
did. He just literally just said the exact same thing.
Right. I mean, it was interesting in the Zoom debate, and this is that you have the opportunity as a candidate. You can just write your opening statement, write your closing statement. You could never do that in a real debate. On a debate stage, if you're sitting there reading a speech, you'd never get away with it. But you could absolutely get away with it here. Vermin Supreme, you could see him reading not only his closing statement, but he was clearly reading his opening statement too. And the same thing was with Hornberger. It was surprising because, it's 3-4 minutes, and you'd think that someone who's been giving some speeches who's been running since November would have this sort of thing down. You wouldn't need to look at your notes and have something. But so I was a little surprised because I think maybe they felt you wouldn't notice that they're reading, but it was pretty obvious that they were reading their speech. And then to Hornberger, the last thing on him is that he used his closing statement in a previous question, which is what we're referring to, where he was telling a story about how he was on the LP platform committee, which clearly he was pointing out the fact that he's been activist in the party for a number of years, which I think is a smart move on his part. But then he used the exact same, told the story exactly the same way because that's how it was written on his closing statement.
Yeah.
and that really made him look, at best you could say sloppy. You could almost say he looks senile. It's just a bad look to repeat yourself. Mm-hmm. So let's go into some of the. Oh, go ahead.
No, so I just wanted, before we move off that, I think there was another distinction that you could draw between Hornberger and the rest of the field. At one point, the moderator asked, would you support the LP presidential candidate / would you be interested in VP? And everyone said they're not interested in VP per se. They said, yes, I will support the LP candidate. He said, no, I will not. I will not do that. And later clarified, it's because Justin entered that he doesn't want to say that. So before Justin entered, he would have, but he has such animosity towards him and what he represents in his mind that he's not going to support him. He will not make that pledge to support him.
Yeah, and that is a good point, and which was again a puzzling sort of thing, because there was no real reason for that position, because I don't know. I mean, you could clearly, like most libertarian debates, everyone thinks they're the only libertarian in the room, and Hornberger is very confident with that position, and so I would think he'd feel that way about Judge Jim Gray and George. Certainly, Jim.
Well, he actually did knock Jim Gray at one point for the same thing.
Yeah, but then he did make it sound like that was what he was, that he couldn't in good conscience support people, which I think it was a strange way of putting it. Like you could, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound like someone who's looking in the best interest of the party, and so you're trying to attract party people, not just random people who are not outside the party, and so that's a calculation he decided to make. So I think, as far as Justin's performance, I think he probably started a little bit slow, and but then by mid debate he was pretty much rolling, and it was clear that he was someone who's done this a bunch, and he was head and shoulders above sort of the rest of the field as far as his polishedness, I guess you'd say. But also, I think he was pretty much on message.
Yeah, I mean, he was very good at articulating a vision. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, no. But he was very good at articulating a vision and what he's outlining, what he wants to do, in a way that is packaged and communicated well, which is essentially what a presidential candidate needs to do.
Yeah, and some specific points. There was a question about, do you support the protesters? I mean, that was obviously one of the things that people had been beating up Justin about earlier, about the fact that he said, they have the right to. Mm-hmm. They have the right to open carry. They have the right to protest. I support those. I just don't think it was a good idea to carry it into the state capitol, because it could be seen as intimidating, and it sends the wrong message. It sort of waters down the message that you're trying to send, that you're not allowed to work, and then you're kind of carrying AR-15s into the state house. Again, it's legal. It's okay. It's you have the right to do that.
It's about messaging. It's about perception.
Right.
What does growth of the party mean? What does growth of these ideas mean?
Right. And so I think he did a pretty good job articulating that. The other thing I had to get a really good answer is, so there was one question about the supporting the nominee, and he actually rebutted that with Hornberger, which I thought was a very good response. That's where he spent his 1 minute rebuttal for Hornberger. And I think kind of tore Hornberger down in that, the fact that he wouldn't support, him. Mm-hmm. What did you think about his answer? So we discussed, the question was for libertarians, when you look at sort of success in a general election for a presidential campaign, 15% is the threshold. Now, Jim Gray kind of pointed out that it's probably not really going to be 15%. If you achieve 15%, they'll change it to 20 to keep you out of the debates. Right. But at least right now, it's, if you achieve 15% national debates or the national polls, then you can make it the debate. 5% allows oftentimes for matching for federal funding, and 3 or 2% for retaining ballot access in most states. What did you think of Justin's answer with that?
I thought it was really good, because he's actually talking about a path for victory. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the only person that was really talking about a path for victory and a path for growing the party was Jorgensen. But I think Justin had a much more thoughtful approach to it. Like, one thing he specifically said was, I want to talk about issues that people can relate to. I'm not going to talk about, like, income tax reform per se, or only going to talk about privatizing Social Security. It's like, what do people connect to? The goal is to bring people into the fold, to support these ideas and to support the candidate. So he wanted to build a coalition of what I think it's true. There's dissatisfied Republicans and dissatisfied Democrats who are looking for a third option. He's not just looking to LP party members. He wants to grow it beyond what there exists. And that's the only way you're going to get that to grow up. You need to get more voters. You need to get more people committed to the ideas. And that means thoughtful messaging. That means thoughtful campaign strategy. And I think he had a really good strategy for what that looks like.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into his question on that they were given to the candidates and about polling or the platform, right? Do you support the platform? And I thought his answer there was very good too, right? Where he's talking about how the fact that he's libertarian and he supports things, but you have to be wise in how you're and how you're presenting the platform of the party, right? You don't go in with, we're going to abolish the federal government tomorrow. You go in with, let's find some libertarian solutions that work. Let's find ways to reduce spending and actually things that aren't going to scare people, because fundamentally you have to get everyone to agree with you, and you don't start at the far extreme. You want to try and move from where they are and move them a little ways in your direction. And then if hopefully they see that it's a good move and that it actually works, and then you can continue moving in the direction you want.
Yeah, that reminds me of two concepts I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit. One, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, is the Overton window, the idea of what's politically feasible in the minds of a lot of people. The Overton window kind of looks at what's the furthest extremes of politics you can get that people will accept. And you can move that, you can shift that over time. But right now, things like abolishing the federal government or dismantling the IRS are not within the realm of political feasibility and viability to most Americans. So talking about that isn't going to get you anywhere. People want something that's feasible within the confines of what we have. And I think Justin's been very good about, this is what the Overton window is. Here's things we can agree on. Here's, as you said, reasonable reforms and libertarian solutions that people can agree with. One other thing related to that, this is kind of a nerdy Austrian thing, but I mentioned a little before Hayek's idea of sort of constitutional change and political evolution, which is very grounded in the thought of Edmund Burke, that you want gradual change. You don't want a complete overhaul. Not to bring back to Hornberger, but he touched this point specifically many times, saying he doesn't want to be a reform candidate. He doesn't want to look at existing systems and see libertarian improvements. He wants to see a complete radical overhaul and a dissolution of everything and of new libertarian identity. And I just don't think that's the right way to do it. I don't think it's the effective way to do it. And I don't think it's a politically feasible move that would get you any kind of support. And I think Justin is very much in that camp of Hayekian gradual change within the confines of the Overton window that we have right now. And I think that's good for him.
Yeah, I think it's certainly when you're running a national campaign and if you're looking for voters, because ultimately, as a political party, you're trying to win. For so long, the Libertarian Party has not won really much of anything. Mm-hmm. And so then it clouds your idea, or at least changes your idea of what victory is seen as, or where your priorities are. If you no expectation of ever winning, you kind of act like it, and then you have priorities change in what maybe a normal political party would be. So I agree. I think Justin's at least has the ability to recognize what is feasible. Messaging. Again, it's like you don't want to walk in the State House with a bunch of AR-15s. Not that it's against your rights, but it's not going to advance your cause. In fact, it may be the opposite, right?
Who are you convincing by doing that doesn't already agree with you?
Right, exactly. And that actually is what is really interesting. Is the question that was the following question was. It was actually they went to the candidate specific questions, and one of the questions was for Justin is, why did you form an exploratory committee and not form a presidential committee? Because I think people are thinking, well, he's not in this, right? He's not committed or whatever. And his answer was fantastic, mm-hmm. I thought, where he really just said, I respect the delegates. They have to choose if they want me or not. I have to earn their trust. I'm not going to come in assuming they're going to just pick me. So I thought that was a really great answer for something that I haven't seen him answer in the media yet at this point.
Yeah, and I think there's another couple ways in which his answers and his questions kind of stood out from the crowd. When they had the opportunity for candidate-specific questions, Justin addressed something to Judge Gray, saying, what do you think is the best strategy for doing something as the former VP nominee? I think it demonstrated his commitment to the party, commitment to the ideas. And he's made very clear he doesn't think this is just about him. The questions that we're talking about, what you do for down-ticket campaigning, he thinks this is a movement. This cannot be about one person. I didn't see that same attitude from a lot of other people on the stage. A couple, but not everyone felt the same way.
Yeah, I think, you as a front runner, which clearly he is coming into it, right? He's got the name ID. He's got the highest office of anyone sitting, any libertarian, obviously.
Featured in a national poll,
so he's coming
which had
in,
good results, which we talked about last episode.
Yeah, right. He's polling at 5% already with, right into the race, and still not really great name ID, but certainly better than most libertarians. Mm-hmm. So he's coming in as a front runner, and he was very smart at how he had his question. He could certainly use his question to attack someone or try and press someone, but instead he really chose he chose a question that, like you said, reflects some serious curiosity, because it's I'm new to the party. How do you get people to do this? And he's been working on it himself for his career, trying to turn people to libertarian message through his town halls. But it was one of actually real curiosity. It was one that's going to build bridges with people who might have liked Gray or that sort of wing. And there was no need for him to attack anyone. And actually, I think probably my hunch is Hornberger was expecting a question, and he never got it. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he was disappointed about that because he thought if I just keep attacking Amash, but
he wanted a fight. He was being combative deliberately and intentionally.
Yeah, and of course it would have been a strategic mistake, obviously, to go after Hornberger when you're clearly probably ahead of him and whatever imaginary polls we have in our minds, mm-hmm. But Hornberger's going after him, and there's nothing you're going to gain by asking him a gotcha question. And so it was a good, it was like a friendly question, and then he probably got lucky in that Vermin Supreme asked him a question, which was, "Will you give me my campaign donation back?" Because I donated.
That was a fun moment. I didn't
which was kind of nice. It was a nice moment of levity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of funny, and everyone laughed, and it was like classic Vermin Supreme. I think it was. I would say I was not. I don't know much about Vermin Supreme outside of the guy who has a boot on his head.
Free ponies.
But I was very impressed with I was very impressed with the fact that he was. You could definitely tell he's intelligent. He didn't seem like he had a real agenda as far as like wanting to become famous or anything like that. I mean, he sort of has some fame, I guess. He was actually probably a good to have on the stage in some ways because. I don't know. He provided some balance and at least a breath of some fresh air occasionally from just some.
Absolutely, there was some levity there. There was a unique voice. I think he'd be a good poet laureate in the Amash administration, perhaps. I don't know if he knows that, but
the Maya Angelou.
But no, I really did. I didn't know a lot about him before this debate beyond just the cursory stuff, but I was impressed with his answers. I think he had a very articulate and unique vision. I don't think that it's necessarily the one that's best suited for a presidency, but I liked what he had to say, and I respected that he said it in the way that he did.
Yeah. Well, we'll see with the polls that are coming out now for the delegates to see what they thought of the debate. I thought as far as the closing statements, I think everyone did, it was fine. I thought Justin is probably, if you had to have a criticism for the debate, is probably the opening closing statements were probably not as tight as they should have been. And so, when you get to an actual debate stage, you have to sort of work on that. But when you look at his performance, of the five candidates who were there, there's only one there really who belongs on a stage with Biden and Trump. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that was pretty clear. The only one who's going to come off as someone who is probably clever enough and smart enough and can hold his own. Because even when Hornberger, well, this is probably the last thing too. The question that Hornberger asked was very puzzling when he asked Justin. Can you kind of go over the question and then I guess the answer from Justin? Because it was not something that I would expect Hornberger to attack Justin over.
Yeah, it was sort of a very specific question about one position on one bill that pertained to abortion access or something on a federal level. And I think Justin answered it very well, essentially saying, I vote my ideals when I am a congressman. And in this case, he has a very libertarian. I know there's debate in the party about this, but I think that there is a very solid libertarian argument for being pro-life if you believe that unborn children are individuals who deserve rights and protection. And I think that his statement reflected that. And he sort of pivoted that to saying, as president, my role is different than what it is as a congressman, which he is right now. It's not to make legislation, it's to reflect legislation, it's to approve or disapprove of certain things on a national level. And essentially, I think he's right that there's a significant amount of partisanship and polarity between Republicans and Democrats on the pro-life, pro-choice issue, and one that I don't think there's going to be substantive change on in the 4 to 8 years of an Amash administration. And I think he's right that the most accessible libertarian answer is no federal funding for abortion providers. I think he was trying, if I had to guess, I think Hornberger was trying to call out Justin for not being a real libertarian, however Hornberger is defining that. But I don't think he picked the best issue, because he picked one that's already divisive within the party, and I don't think he picked the best way to express it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the strategy was there, because I think there were some other bills. When Hornberger has his his Interloper series, which you can watch on YouTube, it's like at part 9 now, I'm not sure, and he texts Justin a number of issues, and I guess I haven't watched many of them. I've watched a couple of them and found them not very interesting, and they're sort of it's sort of like picking one tiny thing and sort of going off on it for about half an hour. This was a weird one because there are other ones I thought that would probably be, you could probably make a more of a libertarian sort of argument about it. This one is, like you said, the abortion issue is kind of a funny one in the Libertarian Party because the non-aggression principle, if you believe it's a life, it has the right to live. And so you can, argue, where life begins and those sorts of things, those same debates we have in the sort of the mainstream. And to pick that, I'm not sure if he was thinking he just would catch him on like a obscure bill and then maybe Justin wouldn't remember, or he thought he hadn't read the bill. But the one mistake that people make all the time, as you and I know, is watching his campaigns, is to try and get Justin tripped up on a bill, right? I mean, the guy actually has studied legislation. There many legislators, they have not read them. They've read just the title. They know what the committee vote was, and they don't really know what the substance or the pitfalls that might be contained in the bill.
Well, they know how leadership wants them to vote, and that's the important thing for
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, precisely. But, I mean, obviously, in this case, there was, Justin didn't remember the exact bill, because I think, Hornberger just gave him like a number, but the number changes every...
there's different numbers for
bill
years.
Every 2 years, right? I mean, House Bill 1 is House Bill 1. Every year, every 2 years is it's a new House bill. So anyway, it was just it was a strange strategy, and for a guy who I think had been planning this for a while, because you knew this debate was coming, I don't know. It wasn't what I had expected from Hornberger. I actually went into the to some of his supporters' pages, and even his supporters are kind of like, yeah, that wasn't a great performance, which I was a little surprised because I feel like that's sort of what Hornberger does, and so I would have expected him to be kind of strong with it. And I don't know. I think Justin did far more than survive. I think he laid out a clear vision of what he wants the party to be and why he should be the leader. And I suspect the delegates, those who watch, would be impressed and come away with, at a minimum, be very comfortable with him as a nominee if he might not be their first choice.
I agree. One quick note on that. Hornberger's bill thing reminded me a lot of Brian Ellis, the 2014 Republican primary opponent. He had a whole series of what he called bizarre vote of the week, where he'd pick some specific bill that Justin voted on in the past 4 years at that point, take it out of context, and make it seem like he's this unhinged lunatic. And that kind of seemed like that to me. You're not talking about philosophy. You're not talking about the ideals and principles that you hold. You're trying to get like a gotcha for some piece of legislation, which I think it's not effective, and I think it's kind of not mature in a sense.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I think if I were Hornberger, I would have gone about this debate differently. I mean, you certainly had plenty of room to attack Amash on certain issues because you can say, well, as someone who never had to take a vote, well, it's really easy to have the 100% pure position on whatever it might be. Trying to vote in a bill that still is pretty, garbage, but it's not as garbage as what the law existed before, like reforming Obamacare or something like that. Those are really tricky sort of votes, or a tax cut bill, but it's lots of the taxes go to the corporations or whatever. I mean, like those things are just so difficult to try to navigate what the best way out of it is. I mean, there are things he could have, pointed out the fact that he would have a very libertarian position, but I think to be on the attack 100% is just never a good idea. And I think he probably, because he's probably sort of reintroducing himself to the party, and I think he did himself a disservice.
He defined himself by opposition to Justin. Like I said before, there was not an identity from Hornberger that I got from that debate, other than he does not like Justin Amash.
Yeah, I've heard Hornberger on other shows and podcasts, and I've generally really liked what I've heard. I thought he's articulate. He's clearly very knowledgeable. So I was just really surprised, I guess, with this performance. I don't know. I mean, I had a fairly favorable view of Hornberger.
To be clear, I do have a lot of respect for Hornberger in his capacity as the Future Freedom Foundation and what he's done to advance libertarian principles and ideas through that and through writing and through everything he's done since leaving his law practice. But I think those are very, very different skills and very, very different things that you need to succeed as a presidential candidate than you do as a policy person or as an ideas person. They're just not the same skill set. So that's not to knock his commitment to the ideas or his principles at all, but just campaigning, strategy, vision. I think those are very, very different things and very different skill sets that you need.
Yeah, I think that probably sums it up better. I won't even try and expound on that because that's excellently put. Let's talk briefly about two things. One, so we talked about the polls with Gen Libertarian. New polls will continue coming out. I think Justin's had some media appearances. He was on Bill Maher on Friday. He's been on David French's show. He's been on
State of the Union, Jake Tapper on CNN.
Yep, he's on State of the Union, Jake Tapper. What's been your impression of Justin's media appearances and since he announced, and what do you think about how it's maybe changed or evolved since the announcement about 2 weeks ago now?
In general, I'm pretty positive on it. I think that, again, he's demonstrating how he can articulate a vision to people who aren't necessarily in the movement already. Preaching to the choir is the easiest thing to do in the world. You know what they like and you know what you have to say. But articulating that vision and articulating those beliefs to a new audience who might not already buy into it is a lot harder to do, and I think he does a very good job at it. I think the narrative is starting to shift. The early narrative was very pro-Biden, pro-Trump, you're stealing votes, etc. But I think it's starting to be more clear, whether in media or in the things that he's saying, that no, he wants to provide a genuine alternative. This is not anti-anybody. This is pro-liberty. And I think that he's had a lot of experience since, I can't remember his first national TV appearance. It might have been 12 or 13 when he was booted off the budget committee. But he's had a lot of experience with this, and he has a lot of know-how in the media and know-how on how to handle that. And I think the more platforms he gets, the better he can reflect that.
Yeah, I think when you look at even the evolution in just the 2 weeks here, his answers, you can see that A/B testing of answers as far as the wasted vote answers and why you're running for president, and you see that strategy or the sort of the vision being refined through the appearances. And it'll be interesting to see how it changes further, because you went to Bill Maher and it was definitely more aggressive interview, and with Zoom it is really tricky. I think it's very difficult to communicate over Zoom sometimes, as you and I know. We've had trouble with our podcast and with the guests and stuff, and so there are weird pauses and sometimes there's connectivity issues, and so I think there was probably a little bit of that during the Bill Maher thing. I think the Bill Maher show went okay. I think there's some things that one needs to work on, and I think that's what he's kind of figuring out at this point. But it's still only a week and a half into the campaign, so I think it's gone pretty well. He's getting a decent amount of media, maybe not as much as I thought he might. I thought he might get more than just Jake Tapper on State of the Union. Now that's maybe me just being greedy, but I think and maybe once he's the nominee, it will change as well. I still think the one thing that's surprising me is the left is so terrified of his entrance into the race. It's the right and the Trump followers do not seem to be that concerned about him, which is interesting because the polls that we looked at looked like he drew support from Trump, and yet you'd almost guess by nature that he would bring more from the Trump side or the Republicans, because he was a former Republican, and yet the left is just going apoplectic about his entrance to the race. They still remain to be. I don't know if they're just more concerned about how their candidate is really, really bad, and that they can't. Or I don't know. I don't understand sort of their response at this point.
I think it speaks to a knowledge of the weakness of the candidates, which again is a strength of Justin. If you're so concerned that simply by having an alternative option that you're going to collapse and you're going to lose to whoever R or D you want, I think that speaks a lot to both his strength as an alternative and viable option and the weakness of the candidates that makes this an achievable thing. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility at all for Justin Amash to be on the debate stage. I don't think that at this point I could say that any other Libertarian Party candidate would have that same level of electoral success, that same level of dedication to the principles that they hold, while still bringing new people into the party. And I think that balance is really, really key. Hornberger, I think you do need to focus on principles. I think that principles are an important thing to do, but there's a balance between purely pragmatic and purely principled, or how you articulate your principles, how you message, how you grow a party, that I don't think a lot of other candidates were as interested in. I think Justin is interested in that, and I think he knows how to do it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's shift focus one more time. We talked about it briefly during our last show with Jen. When it comes to the vice president's position, because I kind of feel like after this debate, there's really no question who the best candidate is as far as being able to articulate it, to handle the media, to handle questions. You can envision, what Justin would look like on the debate stage with Biden and Trump. Whereas the others, I don't think you could, or you'd be concerned that if they made it on, they'd either be ignored or kind of seen as crazy, or maybe boring. So I think he could hold his own there. And so then the question, I guess, is for the vice presidential slot. Right now, Larry Sharpe is the one who the presumptive favorite. He's technically running with Jim Gray. With the Libertarian Party, they're selected separately, so there's no guarantee that he couldn't run with Amash, and he probably seems like a kind of guy who could. Do you know much about Larry Sharpe? Do you have much opinion on him at this point? And then, what do you think about going outside and trying to bring someone else in who might really shake things up?
Two thoughts. Larry Sharpe, it's hard to get a name ID, I think, in the LP among people who don't. I've not been very active in the LP in the past couple of years, but I didn't know the name of Larry Sharpe. I know a little bit about his gubernatorial campaign and the perspectives of some folks we've had on the podcast that are very positive about a lot of his traits. So I don't know a whole lot about him. I don't think I've seen a speech by him or anything, but everything I've heard about him is pretty positive. I think he's a pretty reasonable person. I think he's a pretty articulate person about what he believes. So I think as a VP candidate, that's the kind of thing you want. In addition to ticket balance, you want a messenger. You want someone who can articulate that at the same level as the candidates while still being appealing to a whole variety of groups. Sorry, what was the second question?
Well, no, I guess, if it's not Sharpe, is there someone that you think...
Oh, okay.
Is there someone you'd want to come in and be that vice president? Like, if you could pick anybody and they would actually be a good running mate for Justin, who would you think that would be? Assuming it's not someone who's like already in the field, like a Larry Sharpe.
I don't know if I'd necessarily pick anybody who's not in the field. I think that we've made a lot of comparisons to the 1980 campaign with Ed Clark and David Koch. At least I have. Had a lot of strengths for a lot of reason. David Koch was a committed libertarian who also had significant personal wealth and thus could augment campaign resources in a way that other candidates wouldn't. I don't really know if there's any person like that, a committed libertarian who has the money and the interest in being a vice presidential candidate. If there was one, I think that would be something that's interesting to consider. You run the risk of just finding a rich person who wants to run for vice president that might not really reflect the views. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think you need a candidate for vice president who does reflect the views of the party and the principles of liberty. To me, that's the first and foremost thing. You need to look at that before anything else. And I think there's a lot of people who would fit that. And then I guess if we're not talking about personal resources, you also talk about name ID or different groups that could bring interest into the fold of the party. And I don't know exactly who that would be. I think Larry Sharpe is the name that is at the forefront of my mind. I know we've talked about Kmele Foster a lot in the past. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I don't really know. I doubt you'll peel off any sitting Republicans or Democrats. I saw some people on Twitter talking about Mitt Romney, but I don't think I'd call Mitt Romney a libertarian by any stretch of the imagination. So it'll be interesting to see. I think at this point, it's a lot more difficult, especially with the virtual campaign, which just announced tonight. Sorry, virtual convention tonight that was just announced at time of recording. It's a lot more difficult for an outsider to get in with that than it would be in a normal situation. So I think realistically, it's probably going to be a party insider who's known and who has those qualities.
If you wanted to bring someone in at this point, they'd have to get in pretty soon and to try and get a message. Or I think, quite frankly, if it's possible, if Justin said there's someone he really wanted to go to really mix things up, and if he felt like Larry Sharpe's not the right guy for some reason, or there's someone maybe better, it almost behoove him to try and bring someone on his ticket now, much as Jim Gray did, to say, here's the person who's going to sort of be my running mate. They have to run separately for VP. The delegates will decide, yada, yada. But I think you probably could do that, but it's not going to be someone who's – it definitely couldn't be someone like a Bill Weld. It's got to be someone who's pretty staunchly libertarian. And, I don't even know if – we did mention Kmele Foster. I think he certainly would be someone who'd be interesting. He's certainly got lots of media savvy experience too, probably even more than Larry Sharpe in some ways, although he's not run a campaign. So I don't know if that's a benefit or not, because, if you get any libertarian who's run a campaign, you've almost assuredly picked someone who has lost a campaign. And I don't know how helpful that is, maybe, but so anyway, I think that'll be the sort of the talk, I'm guessing, because my hunch is after the next week, the discussions of a non-Amash presidential candidate are probably going to kind of go away. I don't think there was really any question, if at least people who watched this debate. Well, and we'll have to see the poll results. I know the early results were kind of heavily in favor of Amash from just delegates, and these are people who actually have the opportunity to vote. So
you vote. You're a delegate, right? So you voted in the delegate
I have not
poll?
yet voted, but I was I was notified by someone who is a delegate who had already voted, and they saw the results, and they said it was not close at this point. But, as we're recording, so it's, I don't know, the poll's been out half an hour or something like that. And so I don't know. Maybe it's not in Mosh. Maybe I'll be saying this and he'll lose by 60% or so. I don't think so, but it's possible. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the results are from that poll. It's just a straw poll. It doesn't really mean anything. Delegates can do whatever they want, and I don't know how many delegates out of 1,000 are going to actually vote in this. But there were quite a few people watching online for a Libertarian Party presidential debate of Kentucky. It's not even like the official debate at a convention, so which there'll be another one for the convention for sure, and which is actually an interesting thing because I wonder who will be on the debate stage for that as well, because it may be the same five. And you're probably not aware of this, but usually when you go to a Libertarian Party convention, you are given tokens, and you have, let's say, 5 tokens or something like that. And you go to, they're just jars they have set up for each candidate. And so you put your token into the jar to make sure that person gets to the debate stage. So you might have 5 people you want to see, you put 1 in each jar. Maybe you have 2 people you like, you put 3 in one and 2 in the other or something like that. Or you put 5 in, 1 jar. And so that's how they sort of decide who gets to the debate stage and who has the support. I think there are probably some virtual tokens or something they could probably do for this as well, but it'll be interesting to see who makes the debate stage, because I don't know that it'll be the same 5 we saw today. I don't know where the delegate support is for these various candidates. I suspect Justin will be there, but outside of that, I'm not entirely certain. I think it'd be Hornberger. I think Gray. Outside of that, I'm not.
Probably those 3 at least for certain.
I would think so. Yeah.
The rest are a little more up to it.
So anyway, any parting thoughts for the week or what you expect for the next week coming up?
Just to thank the Libertarian Party of Kentucky. I think they did a very, very good job at organizing that. They had good questions. They had a good infrastructure set up. And I've never seen a Zoom presidential debate before. So it's the first one, but I was very impressed. And I thank them for inviting Justin and for their good work.
Yeah, it was a surprisingly professional production, which is not always the case, you think, sometimes with libertarians. So I was impressed as well. And I think they did a very nice job. And it was very fair and moderated very well. It was, I think, extremely fair to all the candidates. They all had an opportunity to really express themselves and show who they are and what their vision was. I'd like to mention, if you have not yet subscribed to the show, please subscribe to the Amash Files. Make sure you don't miss any of our episodes. They're kind of random as far as when we release it. We don't have set release days. It's sort of when things happen, and so we felt we had to get one out after this debate with it still fresh in our minds and to give you our analysis. Plan on having Justin on at some point pretty soon, so if you have questions, please email those questions to me at amashfiles@gmail.com. Again, make sure you subscribe, share the show. It's been really a phenomenal response. Both Tyler and I are super excited about how well it's gone. I mean, I think we thought there was a lot of interest, but it's far more than I think I had even anticipated just right out of the gate.
One other quick thing. I did live tweet the debates on the @Amash Files Twitter. If you missed the debate and want to see some highlights, I would recommend checking that out if there's not a recording available from the time this comes out.
And actually, you can watch the debate if you want on YouTube. I know they actually can watch all the rounds. This is the 5th round. So make sure you watch the right round. Because I started watching one, I'm like, wow, these comments start matching. Okay. These aren't matching the debate. Then I realized I was watching round 2, which was 3 weeks ago. Sometimes I'm very mid-40s, and sometimes as far as my media presence. So anyway, thanks again from Tyler and Eric here at the Amash Files. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to the Amash Files. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player and share it with your friends. We'd appreciate it if you left a written and 5-star review too. Send all questions and guest ideas to amashfiles@gmail.com.